100. I've almost made it 2 years now. Just 4 more weeks and 2 years put into this project, 40 hours a week. Um, so at the beginning of the week, I had gotten a prod build out, and I wanted to change from what I was currently doing last week, which was working on the melee attack functionality, back to testing out the stuff that I did for the main menu, make sure that the persistence um, was working in production. So I started testing around, and let's see, there was just a bunch of issues going on that I had to kind of start to make a list. And so first of all, I had to kind of dive in and see what's going on. So I got Proxima and breakpoints working again. I figured out how to set that up. And so the current production build, it didn't actually have the most recent loading process. And the build was actually failing to load the first levels. I'm actually still getting some weird, if I have a lot of like system, I don't know, there's some crash. Like if I have an old system and there's like memory saved and used up, if I restart the computer, then it loads up. There's something going on. I have to figure out how to do crash handling, because you know, if a user has like stuff already in memory, and like loading the first level gobbles up a lot of memory, and it tends to like to crash. So I don't know how to fix that, but that's just something I'm noticing. But so the first build was failing to load on the first levels for some reason. So I had to get in there and kind of figure out what the heck was going on. And basically what was happening is that in production, I had this thing going on in code where when I was loading the levels, I was loading all the resources, and basically on cutscene or anything else, like I was holding the activation of certain scenes, like the character scene and the level scene, until a proper point when I could dismiss the loading screen, and then I can activate these scenes. Well, in production, it doesn't like that. It's very finicky, even more finicky than the editor is. Like in the editor, it'll freeze up on you if you try to load another scene, if other scenes are pending activation. This is even more so, where another scene just won't load. It'll just simply hang. So after figuring out what the problem is, I kind of had to go in and do like a fix to kind of, because I wanted to get this branch fixed just so I could test my persistence. That was my main goal. So basically, I did that fix and I did another build. And since I'm including both levels, it takes about like an hour each build. Oh, it's only later that I figured out, like, because I wanted to test not only persistence, but actually like persistence when you do like a level load, like loading from level to level. So I did another build, and I was able to actually validate that most of the persistence in the menus was working correctly. Like if you switch to English and you reload, English is still there. Like there was only one thing I think that was not working, was the brightness, but everything else, like um, it would remember and load whatever it was on. Um, And then I was able to actually validate the case from, loading level to level. Like if you load from you end with level 1 and you go to level 2, that restarting the game, it'll actually know the checkpoint and then start off at level 2. And so I wanted to get the latest I wanted to start clean and get the latest level loading because I did a kind of a abstraction refactor to get the parity between loading from level to level and loading from the initial from the main menu. So I merged in those changes in order to do another build. Um, and yeah, it's like for my first build testing, there was just a whole bunch of stuff that was not working. Um, like the doing the switching from these windows, for some reason that wasn't working. The resolution, um, the resolution was extra finicky. Like I thought it had something to do with like the actual the persistence. I figured out how to, how to delete like the user preferences for a standalone application. It's like in the registry and how to figure how to set that out. But um, one of the major problems I was seeing was that I didn't consider or test before I did the build was that there is no parity between this setting screen and the main menu screen. So that means if I change something, especially on sequential loads, like on the first load, if I do something from the menu and load the game, it'll change because this pause menu is initialized. But if you were to say change something here and then go back to the main menu screen, it would actually show up on the main menu screen because this menu is initialized again. But if you were to go and load into the game again, or you change something from the menu now on the second time around and you load into the game again, the pause menu is not reinitialized and it will not pick up those changes. So there was no, and pretty much for everything, most things, there was no parity between the state between both menus, which should be like, yeah, doesn't matter which one you change, they should both reflect the same current setting. And it was mostly on the second, like, exit from game and then reload, is mostly the pause menu had to be fixed up. So um, yeah, so got a new build out and got everything running again with the hanging load process, and everything was looking good for even like the loading process for the new level, and nothing. Yeah, I made sure to remove all the do not activate on load. So it works in a little different way, but now it will. It actually works out a little better for the checkpoint, but I have to like show another loading screen after the checkpoint finishes because I have to now load the next portions of the level. But that's all working. Let's see what it. Overall, I put a lot of good work in, and it's really surprising how much extra work getting everything fixed up, all the problems I spotted. So one of the things about this UI framework, this Reach UI framework, like it has a lot of good stuff and it takes me a lot of the way, but honestly, it takes me about 80% of the way. The rest I have to customize to what I need, and there's a lot of these there's a lot of issues with polish with this framework that when I was heavily testing it, that you know a lot of issues were happening, like sometimes with this drop down menu, or just another good example is you were allowed to like switch between these tabs like as fast as you want, and if the animation didn't finish by the time you switched, it could get in this like this in-between stuck state where you'd actually see nothing here when you select a tab, and you kind of have to mess around. It's not very quality. So I kind of had to go in there and fix the issues that they had in their framework. The taking it the rest of the way, so where the user can't go and break it accidentally. And a lot of the issues surrounded around um, making sure that when you switch from the controller to the keyboard, like one of the issues was if you switch to controller, it should highlight something. Should act like do a selection so you can actually. Before it was like you'd move the controller and you'd have to do some fandangled thing where you have to go to another menu um, and then go back and then your controller would be there. But now, so just like all these little, dozens of tiny little issues that I spotted like that need to be fixed, and just putting a lot of work. Um, and So I had these like iteration rounds where I would fix a whole handful of issues and do a build and then do more testing and spot another handful of issues and round it goes. So several iterations, and it's just like it felt like it never would end. I'd fix a bunch of stuff and then all of a sudden, something that was working before, all of a sudden, if I hit a button on the controller, it's not responding, or just a lot of random things. And so I just had to keep going and keep making progress and iterations. One of the interesting things was I had spotted some sort of like another case in this framework where they were using singletons, where I had to kind of either decide to remove the singleton or to and then globalize it, or to actually make the singleton like instance and context based. And I had to do that for the controller. So it's like, because there was a lot of these little subtle little bugs like I had before with the original, I couldn't figure out what was going on until I realized that for both menus they're using two different singletons, and then there's no warnings or checks. It's like it depends. Like it's like once the pause menu loads its singletons, then that takes over, and then the other singleton is lost. So it's like two singletons fighting over. So you're having these other singleton issues that I've had before. It's just like just further this time, and it was leading to like these really unexpected, like unstable issues. I couldn't figure out what was going on until I actually finally spotted and like, oh, I see what's going on. We have multiple singletons again. So more coding work, more testing. And so yeah, I made sure that the cutscenes was everything was looking good for the loading process. Just a lot of work. There was a lot of differences between what works in the editor and what doesn't work in production. Um, and I kind of had to. Another thing that wasn't working that I ran into was this issue all of a sudden now, which was working before. Now all of a sudden in production, when I go through this portal, the V camera transitions weren't working. It's like, what the heck's going on? So again, like I had to investigate, come to the root of the problem, and it basically had something to do with the player did switch sector channel, and the channels are SO objects. So that kind of reminded me, like I had issues before with like SO objects, and I kind of fixed issues. Well, basically, in production, Unity handles serialized object assets a little differently. Sometimes it works fine, there's no issue, but in this case, what it was doing, it wasn't using a single serialized asset object. It was deciding to go ahead and create another instance of it and register those events to that new instance, which was pretty much not connected to anything. So that, So what I had to do before is now I had to go in and kind of rework my system to load these addressable serialized channels up front uh, in a way and come up with a solution. It was a little bit tricky because doing an addressable load, it actually requires async, and if I didn't do it right with like coroutine returns, it would I would be running into race conditions because a lot of my like my initial game load process is calling these channels that should be there right off the bat. So eventually I got it working where it's loading single sources with addressables, and that problem on the next build that was taken care of. It's just like it's just like that was one of those major issues, and it's like this whole week is like several major issues getting things to work properly in prod, and just like dozens and dozens of smaller issues with just UI stuff, fixing and bringing this UI so it's rock solid, like production worthy. One of the things that was really driving me through a wall was this resolution drop down. Now, like build after build, I thought I had a fix for it. Like, oh, that must be the error. But then I just keep making builds, and every time you hit this, I finally got this windowed mode working. If you switch this around, it actually. But this resolution was refusing. This drop down UI, it looked like transparent. It was broken, and it would freeze everything. It would freeze the UI. It would just, I don't know. Well, this was part of the thing I had to refactor for like the controller manager because the controller manager singleton was only assuming it was global, and it was only assuming one drop down. Now I have two drop downs, one for the pause menu and then one for the main menu. Now I had to kind of remove that and to kind of rework it and to say, okay, I want you to initialize the resolutions. You pass in the drop down. I want you to initialize the resolutions per drop down. So I had to rework their thing from their assumptions of singleton to rework it to use it in where it can be used in multiple menus. So um, finally, like one of the last builds, I finally figured out what's going on. I was using Proxima and debugging, and basically there's a difference between editor and production, where editor was actually matching the number of, which was 27, and then production was actually giving like 90 different resolutions, and most of them are garbage. You just filter it out, but the good ones, we actually want to use the screen resolutions to initialize these individual elements in the drop down um, as the authoritative source in the singleton. So once I figured out it was some sort of indexing issue, that finally got to working, and this UI wouldn't freeze up, and now I can actually change around the resolution again. So what was working before, it's just like this whole week. It just like a lot of things felt like they were working before, but just weren't working anymore. And the differences between production and the editor. Um, but I think around Thursday, I finally did the last build, and I figured that instead of doing an hour build each time, what I would do is I would go and delete a bunch of stuff in my addressables, so that way the build wouldn't require anything from a level 2, because I already tested persistence from level to level loading, and I was happy with that. All I needed to see was that, test out the loading process of not even the whole level 1, but just the first scene of the first level. So I really cleared out a bunch of unnecessary addressables, and that cut down the build time from an hour to 20 minutes. Um, so that helped, and I was able to test faster and then do a couple more testing rounds, and finally get to a place where there was, I'd fixed the last issue from my list. There's no more iterations to do. I was, finally, it's like, oh, thank goodness. So all the persistence is working, the parity between different menus, the loading, and it all works correctly in production. It's finally all come together. There's no more issues to do, and I mean, it just took longer than expected. It took the majority of the week when I was expecting just to test a couple things and get it working production, just test out the persistent, and it turned into a whole week-long deal of really ironing out a lot of issues with the menu. But it's all done now. Um, and I was happy on Friday. It's like that's probably behind me. Got it all committed. Now I can move on back to what I was um, doing originally, um, which was the actual melee work. So I'll switch over to that. So for the rest of the week, I switched back to doing what I was doing before, which was working on the melee functionality. I On Friday I put in a little bit more time. I usually put in 2 hours on the first level artwork, and um, got a good portion more done on that. I'm actually closing in on finishing that. There's a little bit more work to do, but soon I'll have. I think next week I'll have the first level screen artwork done. And then for the rest of the time, I switched over and set up this project again to be ready. And I started testing it. I was ready to do the actual melee attack when you hit the X button or the attack button. It would do like a melee animation attack. So first thing I did was kind of review the Invector uh, demo to kind of understand and how to not develop everything from scratch, but how to like kind of bootstrap their system and to use the melee functionality, how to leverage their system too. And everything looked clean and clear, so I went and implemented it. And I was very surprised and pleased on the first test when I first was testing the input on the melee attack. It all on the surface looked to be working great. It would actually there's this like chain attack. If you do one, it'll do one. If you do two, it'll do two, and then if you do three, it'll do a combo attack. And it was working great because it would like I thought I would have to do a lot more legwork to tell the system manually like, hey, apply root motion. Don't allow like if you're running, like stop the movement and do the animation. And then apply root motion, and then I'd have to do a bunch of work to set up like different animations, like for like chaining, like split up, do custom animation work, all this other stuff. But it was just like it was actually working pretty close to this right out of the box, and I was like, okay. But of course, I had to make sure that and validate like everything was working how it should under the hood, and I had to do a bunch of testing as well to make sure. And of course, when I was doing testing, there was several issues going on, but just a handful, honestly. Like I had to go in and kind of figure out with the animation. They had some sort of behavior set up. I had to, instead of doing like a tag to kind of tell the system when to release and allow you to move again, I kind of had to go in with the behavior and add a little bit of custom behavior to kind of fine tune like when you should be allowed to start moving again. Little tweaks, and then other things like you should only be allowed to melee attack animation when you have melee weapons. I already had the systems built for that, so I hooked into that. And also like, yeah, so you can't just it had it so I was actually able to do like fist striking animations, but I just wanted it to be able just to do animations when you have the melee weapons equipped. So there was an issue with clipping through on the third strike, but that's not happening anymore. And there was another odd issue I had with like hard turning. It was a bug to where if you did a hard turn, it wouldn't set back to normal, and every time you did a melee animation, it would like turn you to this direction. It was an odd bug I had to work out. So just a handful of bugs, and I actually got it to looking pretty darn good in my opinion. And make sure that you can't attack when you're jumping, things like that. I think it looks pretty good, especially for a prototype. I'm pretty happy with it. So I got to that point on Friday, and I like ending the week. I'm ready to attempt and set up the next stage, which is like hitboxes on the weapons, so that I'm gonna set up an enemy, and there's going to be just like a projectile. When the hitbox hits the enemy collider, it'll actually send a signal to do some damage and whatever. So yeah, so I will continue work on that. I should be able to wrap that up next week and then get on to the other player features. The one thing I was trying to do though at the end of the week, though, I was trying to set up this enemy here, and the problem is that for some reason my behavior designer, it had gone funny for the actual behavior tree for the for this particular enemy. The file had got corrupted or something, and it just won't open the behavior graph. So it's just a bunch of errors, and there's no debugging. I had previously tried to reconstruct it and like copy over, and that seemed to work temporarily. Everything was fine, but then it just showed up broken again. I couldn't get it to set the reference and then open up. It would go corrupt every time. So I finally said, oh, I'm kind of stressing because it's like I'm not gonna. It's like this is the last straw for this, graphical behavior designer thing. Like I tried the first one with Invector and then moved on to the first party solution, which was limited, didn't have all the functionality I needed. This third one, I had to go and refactor and redo a lot of my behavior work I'd done already, and that took a while. But it had the ability to be able to abstract and out different subtrees, which really you could share those around, which is really necessary for like an enemy behavior system that shares certain behaviors. But sometimes it's just the system's a little flaky, it errors out, and this time it's like if it errors out and I lose file, like I'm hoping this is like a one-off thing where like if I'm constantly losing like files where I can't open old files, there's just bugs and errors, and it's like I don't want to, but if I have to, like it's like you just gonna have to bite the bullet and create your own graphical behavior system or something. I don't even want to think about that, because that means I have to refactor all my current enemy behavior to another system. That's the fourth time. So I'm gonna go and try to step-by-step rebuild this minion shooter subtree. And thankfully, like the nice thing about the child subtrees, those are safe. Those are in their own files. It's just the this particular root subtree for this enemy that's gone bad. If I recreate step by step, it shouldn't take too long. And hopefully that will hold. Hopefully it won't get broken when I try to open it for whatever reason. So I'll do that on I will do that on next week, and we'll continue on down the line. Now, so 4 more weeks to go, and that's a year. I didn't quite meet my my objective goal to be done with, or at least on the level 1 gameplay testing phase by the end of the second year, but we gotten pretty close, and as long as we're making good progress, we'll have to replan and everything. But I think this is pretty cool, having the ability to do melee attacks in the game alongside shooting. So it's really something else. So um, we'll leave it there, and we will check in with you next week. Thanks. Bye.